Okay, everyone, and hello, and welcome to another huge project. This has been a big undertaking, and I am really excited to share it with you. So first up, everything you're going to see in this video is available for download. I'm going to have it in a PDF and it's a collection of JPEGs. So if you just want to download the material and get the hell out, check the description down below for the links. Otherwise, I'm going to have chapters. You can jump around if you want. All I'm going to ask is if you take it and you like it, come back, leave the video a little thumbs up. So what have I been working on? Well, the last video I made about elemental ratio, a lot of people wanted me to create something for them to download. They want my spreadsheets, which is a hard ask. So I said, I'm not going to give you my spreadsheets, but I will give you something potentially even better, which is this cool little guide I made. And not only that, I did status testing. So not only are you going to have a downloadable guide that you can use for every monster that looks nice and has like cute little icons and stuff like that, it's also going to tell you all of the status breakdowns as well as my recommendations for every monster in the game. That goes without saying, major spoilers, beware. Otherwise, here it is. So just to go over it from the beginning in case you had missed the previous video, we are looking at the monsters hit zones. So if you're looking at this guide here, what it's showing is cutting, impact, and shot damage on the top row. And then on the side, it will show whatever the recommended elemental damage, in this case, fire. And then of that, whenever you attack a monster, you have a certain percentage of the damage you deal as whether it's cutting or impact or shot damage, 50% in case of cutting, and then 15% for fire. We combine those two values together to create an elemental ratio. So of the raw damage we're dealing, how much elemental damage are we doing? The higher that number, the better element is. And so we can see over here, you know, this is an example of a bad elemental ratio, right? 23 is low. We're looking for ones that are at least 33, if not at least 40 or higher. This one here, 89, is really high, and in cases like that, you would really want to use element. That's it. That's all you need to know. If you see a big number there, especially something over 40, you probably want to consider using element. Next up is status, and we haven't gone over status in any recent videos, and it's probably been a very long time since even anyone explains status. So I might actually make this first image just a little bit larger here, just so people can see it a bit better. So status, the way you're applying it is actually not all that different from element. The only difference is it only usually applies about 1 out of every 3 hits. And then rather than doing damage directly, it builds up a certain amount, certain levels towards inflicting the monster. You're going to see this chart here throughout the various monsters. And there's going to be 4 columns. First column is going to refer to how much of that status you must apply for the very first application. After that, every application after that is going to require this additional amount, right? So your first blast is 70, and then for your second blast, it'll be 70 plus 30, so it would be 100. And it'll continue to increase for every status application up until the max limit, in which case it'll cap out at that value. And then for the final column, it's just what is the effect? Time paralyzed in seconds, time that it goes from falling asleep to getting out of the sleep with the sleep stat here. Blast damage, which as far as I can tell is always 150, and then seconds, and then damage under poison. This is done normally. This is not without poison extender. If you are going to use poison, you probably would want to use poison extender. So that's just to keep it in mind there. What we have so far in Wilds is a very interesting mix-up of weapons. There's a lot of good elemental weapons, but then there's a lot of great status weapons. There's nothing so far that comes out and says, I am the absolute best raw weapon that beats everything, which is great. So now you're almost always going to have a choice between either element or status. And so what this guide is going to try and help you to do is determine which element or which status should you be using. Okay, on to our first monster. So Nerscylla. This is a really funny one because it's got 2 not good elemental hit zones and then probably the best or among the best paralysis weaknesses in the game. And so the easy part is saying we should probably use Paralysis on Nerscylla because we already know that our elemental ratio is low. The only other question then is, would we have any particular reason to use Blast or Sleep? And I don't know that I ever would. I mean, you could maybe use some Blast at some point just to help maybe break like the Gypceros coating off the back just for fun. But otherwise, I would say just use Paralysis the whole time. Don't bother looking back. If for some reason you were using Hunting Horn, maybe Thunder Hunting Horn on the belly would be okay. I don't even know for Hammer, because even with Hammer, you'd probably want to stick on the head. Okay, next one, Kut-Ku. Kut-Ku is another kind of funny one. If you're using Hammer, or even if you're using a weapon that can only hit the head and you can't reliably hit the wings, Ice is actually pretty good, but it has an 80% cutting value on the wings. That is among the best in the game. So if your weapon struggles to hit the wings, and he will drop his wings when he's paralyzed, revealing that much better hit zone, I almost feel like you're better off doing that. Let me see if I can show off the Paralysis. So here's an example of Paralysis. You can just see that even though I'm not attacking them, those wings are just down on the ground constantly. And I think most people who have fought Yian Kut-Ku a lot will also agree that this monster moves around like almost way, way too much. So I think it's good to bring it. If you're Hammer, bring Ice. That's definitely a high enough Ice ratio that I would want to bring Ice on Hammer. But even then, Paralysis is not bad. Okay, Hirabami is actually kind of interesting. He is extremely weak to Paralysis. The Paralysis lasts quite a while. He's weak to Sleep in the sense that Sleep procs easily, and it doesn't increase by much, and the max is fairly low. But then the Poison is also way up there as well. One of the weakest to Poison monsters in the game. The only reason I still think Fire is okay is if you're actually still stuck hitting the tail. 40 is a pretty good elemental ratio, but it's not going to be a bad choice for this monster. It really depends. If you're in a group, you could mix it up. If you're solo, you could just use all one or all the other. I don't think it's a tough choice either way. As of right now, he's only tier 1, and we don't have a much harder version of Hirabami to fight. Up to you. Okay, Lala Barina is really funny. Lala Barina is funny because I struggled to come up with a secondary status, and in the end, I'm like, probably just use Paralysis again. I think for most people, Fire makes the most sense, especially when the petals are revealed. That is a lot of fire damage. Even without the petals revealed, Fire's pretty good. But let me see if I could show off Paralysis, just so you can see what happens. Especially in a group, I feel like it would be incredibly powerful. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be fighting Lala Barina only because they're going to be farming it up in order to make more Paralysis weapons. Some of the Ardian weapons do make good Paralysis weapons, but just having craftable things available, I think, is a huge benefit. And you can see here, again, the stun is only 10 seconds. Lala Barina is mostly resistant to Paralysis, but its petals are out the entire time. So other than that, Sleep, the wake up time is really fast. It just didn't feel that worth it to me. Blast could be used. I wouldn't use Poison. Well, I don't know. Poison's okay. It's just like, it's not exciting. It's not good. Neither of those are really good. Whereas at least with Paralysis, you could be helping your teammates do something. Okay, Congalala. Conga is another one where he's got such a high elemental ratio on his head. I feel like it's pretty good. Consequently, he is paralyzed for a very long time. I don't know. This is the first time I've played a Monster Hunter game since Monster Hunter DOS where Paralysis feels this good. Like, never since Death Prize has Paralysis been this good. But hey, the monster's loss is our win. So usually what I would say is use Paralysis until you start getting really those very large diminishing returns. Maybe you've gotten your 3rd or maybe 4th Paralysis. then switch over to your elemental weapon and finish the fight. Again, I know Kong is not strong now, but maybe he'll have a stronger version in the future. Quematrice is funny. Quematrice is really, really funny because element is okay and status absolutely destroys him. Whether you pick paralysis, whether you pick sleep, whether you pick poison. I know he's like the second weakest monster in the game, but he is completely destroyed by all of those options. And even then, water isn't that bad on his tail. I think it's very funny. But what are you going to do? Again, it's another opportunity to use off statuses where we would not have necessarily used them a lot before. Okay, Balahara is interesting. Again, head has a pretty good elemental ratio. Otherwise, the tail is slightly weaker to cutting than it is to element. So if you were using status, it might be a good opportunity to start attacking the tail. I would say with as long as this paralysis lasts at 14 seconds, I would personally rather use paralysis. He likes to run around a lot. It's like, I don't know why. I understand that they have to kind of script him to make him do other things, whether he's climbing around on a pillar or running away and then climbing up a pillar, or then digging down and then just hanging out inside the ground. I don't know why that is. Let me see if I can show off the paralysis. There's the sleep. Paralysis might have been earlier. There we go. There's our paralysis. And he just leaves his head completely stuck out. So you can either continue to combo the head if you want, or if you're not worried about maybe cutting the tail and interrupting the animation, you could go for the tail as well. Again, that's going to be slightly better damage if you're cutting, and that'll leave more room around the head for somebody that's going to be using a hammer. I think it's very funny that I created a guide for Chatacabra, but I have spoken to some people that did not get through the tutorial, so this is for you. He's another one of those guys that's like super, super weak to everything, as you would expect from like kind of one of the starting monsters. He's not particularly weak to sleep. You're going to see here he wakes up very quickly, and he gets back into action relatively quickly too. But when you use things like paralysis on him, you know, it is 14 seconds. And with a max of 580, you could probably get a whole team para-looping him very consistently if that's what you brought in. So if he's your victory lap at the end of a tempered Arkveld, that's fine. Otherwise, I think we're going to move on. So for Rompopolo, I included hit zones for the head and deflated head. His tail, when it's deflated, is very close as well. What is interesting here to me is he is weak to both paralysis and sleep, but he has a very long sleep animation. So I'm going to try and show off this paralysis animation. And you'll see it's long. It's 14 seconds, which is among the longest in the game. It's a little annoying because he kind of does like move himself around a lot. My head is kind of wiggling. I guess that's what focus mode is for. So, and I do count that kind of cooldown flinch at the end as part of it. And then I'll just show you him sleeping. And just take a look at it. It reminds me, I mean, I think it's the same body type as Quematrice. So, you know, they kind of share sort of a similar animation where they take a very long time to go to sleep, and then they take a very long amount of time to wake up. So in situations like this, if I'm going to be in multiplayer, I'm okay with bringing sleep, because even if somebody screws it up, the animation is just as long. And he is quite a bit weaker to sleep than he is to paralysis. Of course, paralysis itself is still fine. I'm not sure if you want to mix paralysis and sleep, because one can interrupt the other, and that's a little annoying. Otherwise, water is, of course, great. He's got very high elemental ratios. You know, 25 water is always going to be good for element. It's up to you. Rathian, no major surprise here. She is very weak to dragon. Very high elemental ratios, both of which over 40. As for status, you know, she's relatively weak to both paralysis or sleep. You know, the head takes so much damage, especially on hammer. I would personally probably bring sleep hammer, I guess. Again, you're probably going to be KOing her out of the paralysis anyways, so you may as well get sleep that happens a little bit more often. Otherwise, with cutting, you can kind of go either way, assuming you didn't want to go for dragon. Okay, Gypceros. Again, I think for most people, their first initial goal is getting that head broken. Unless you're using something like Gunlance, you want to be using fire to inflict as much damage on that head as possible to get that break. So then you can go in and start doing other things. That being said, paralysis is not that bad on him, and he is paralyzed for a very, very, very long time. So even though his head only takes 45% damage, that still technically triggers weakness exploit. It's not super, super resistant. Otherwise, I think Blast could be okay as long as you're good at aiming your hits. A couple Blast procs on the head would probably go pretty well in terms of breaking his Light Crystal. It's up to you. Either are fine. Main thing would be is if you were using paralysis, once the head is broken, you want to make sure you move over and start hitting the tail instead. Tail is going to take a lot more damage than the head once the crystal is broken. Okay, Shay Wu. I know it's technically Shu Wu, but in-game, they call it Shay Wu. Don't blame me. Blame Capcom. This is like one of the only monsters I'm going to maybe recommend poison on. He is incredibly weak to poison. If you've been trying to workshop a foray build, this is the guy to use it on. I mean, it would be like 40 seconds per application or so. And then to apply it again would probably only take another 40 seconds to do. So it's well within your right to use foray here. Otherwise, his sleeping animation is very long. So I'm going to see if I can show that off here. Okay, so here he is going to sleep. Similar to the other brute monsters, very long animation to actually fall asleep. And then there's actually a quite a long amount of time where they're actively sleeping and they just don't wake up. They just don't. Now, I wouldn't blame you for using paralysis because paralysis is slightly easier to inflict than sleep. I like that it's so long, and then not only that, especially if you're playing with Greatsword or if you're playing with somebody who is using Greatsword, you could use the very end of that sleep animation to have them potentially get an extra opportunity to cut off one of the tentacles. It's up to you. They're both very good. Poison, sleep, even ice. Even ice is still good here as well. Okay, Rathalos. Sorry. Guardian Rathalos. Again, very high elemental ratio here. You know, especially with how the fight goes, a lot of the times it can be harder to hit his head, but he is constantly putting his legs down in front of you. And when he does that, he takes like a ton of dragon damage. That being said, sleep also works for getting him out of the air, and both his head and legs are very weak to raw. So even though you would be losing out on a very good dragon hit zone, I could understand wanting to do something to get him out of the air. Definitely. I'm going to try and show off a little bit of this paralysis. One thing to note as well is the way the Guardians work is once you've dealt enough damage to one of their weak spots, they do topple over, which is good. Can help discharge them. So something like sleep can really help you concentrate your damage if they've already been charged up and you want to get them to be discharged, and then you want to use your elemental weapon on them when they are discharged. Okay, Blangonga. Again, excellent fire hit zones here. 30% fire is great, and even with a very high raw hit zone, an elemental ratio of 43 is good. I struggled to recommend a secondary status here. Blast is just normal. Poison is just normal. Para and sleep are not particularly great, especially not with how much fire damage he takes. It's kind of up to you if you don't want to make a fire weapon, although there are some very good fire weapons. The Rathalos craftable ones are very good, which is to say nothing of the Ardian ones. It's up to you. He moves around a lot. If I was playing multiplayer, I could see wanting to run paralysis just to kind of keep him locked down a little bit longer. Okay, up next is Rathalos. Slight difference here. Still a very high elemental ratio, although not as good as Guardian Rathalos, I'm noticing. But Paralysis does seem to last just a little bit longer. So that might be a consideration for you if you were going to be running something, especially if, you didn't think you're going to be sticking around the head that often. If you're using dual blades, you're playing with somebody using hammer. The paralysis time, I might have juiced a little bit here because I did paralyze him out of the air. That might have added 2 seconds, but even still, the total animation, I think, is going to be at least 12 seconds. He has that whole shakedown after a paralysis, so it's really good. Especially something like hammer. I could see running paralysis hammer here, even with a 43 ratio, just to help keep him grounded. All right, Guardian Fulgur Anjanath. What a treat this fight is. Insanely high elemental ratio, especially in terms of breaking the legs. I would absolutely want to stick with ice until the legs were both broken. But then after that, and especially when he's discharged, paralysis lasts like a really, really long time. Let me see if I can skip ahead to when he gets paralyzed. Both paralysis and sleep, both last so long. Again, he's got that brute wyvern thing where he takes a very long time to fall asleep, and even when he wakes up, it takes him quite a while to wake up and start doing something again. And so that goes both ways with both sleep and then paralysis as well. So keep it in mind. They're both good. It's up to you and your team in terms of what you decide you want to run. I think they're both fine. Okay, Guardian Doshaguma. This is a funny guy because, again, his head and his foreleg technically have different ideal elements. Fire is more broadly beneficial, but if you knew for a fact you're going to be hitting his arms the entire time, I think Dragon is a slightly better element. Otherwise, he does have a longer paralysis animation than general. 14 seconds is a really long time. So if you're going to use paralysis or sleep, I would say use paralysis here. Okay, Ajarakan is another interesting one. Among the highest elemental ratios in general, you're looking at over 50% even on his forelegs. So I would at most use your status for like 1 or 2 applications, and then I would stick with water the majority of the time. One thing I did find interesting is he takes normal blast damage. Like he just kind of has normal blast resistances, which is like, why? Why is it just normal? I think it would be reduced or we would have an incredibly high tolerance to it, but he doesn't. Whatever, it is what it is. Use water on this guy. It is definitely worth using water on him. Doshaguma is really cute. I think he's really cute when he falls asleep. Can I show him sleeping? He like crosses his legs kind of. I think that's really funny. Still weaker to paralysis. And fire is still a pretty good choice on him in general, only because he doesn't really take that much raw damage. But even then, I could still see somebody using paralysis. Just because it lasts for so long. We should be able to show off the paralysis in just a moment here. Oh yeah, it's already going. And there's nothing saying you have to exclusively use something. Again, if you're playing in a group, it's more than fair to have people mix it up, 1 or 2 people using status weapons, another 1 or 2 people using more elementally damage-focused weapons. It could be either way. It's whatever you want to do. Ebony Odo. He is definitely designed for, like, people to feel as if blight resistance has huge value. Because he is insanely weak to water. He has some of the highest elemental ratios in the game, but then he also has some of the longest paralysis animations as well. Sleep isn't bad either. See if I can show sleep first. You can see here, it's very long. He's like on the ground and I'm like hitting him in the head and the head is like moving around. That's so funny. So I do want to show off the paralysis though, only because like you won't believe it. unless you see it. You're gonna be like, there's no way it's actually that long. And maybe I got my timing off. Of course, I did everything manually, and none of this has been data mined. Well, the columns are data mined from Kiriniko. Thank you, Kiriniko. But the actual timing and the effect of everything, I recorded that myself. And he's just like, he's just there. He's just stuck in that animation forever. And he has this massive animation, this massive cooldown at the end. So the only thing I found surprising, he is not weak to poison anymore. In Iceborne, he was kind of weak to poison. I guess they're like, we can't make him weak to everything. We made him weak enough as it is. Okay, Gravios, no surprises here. Even weaker to element than Ebony Odo. Only thing I would say is he's also pretty weak to paralysis. I'll see if I could show it. That's sleep, which isn't that good. The sleep isn't that good. Paralysis actually lasted quite a while, though. So once his stomach has been broken, I would still say you should keep your water weapon on. But if you were doing some sort of multiplayer hijinks and you wanted to paralyze him, I wouldn't blame you just to get 1 or 2 out. 14 seconds is a long time. But still, overall, I would say water is your best bet. Okay, Arkveld. So this is a weird comparison because I'm showing you a whole lot of things on screen. The bottom video is me showing off the elemental absorption his chain blades have when you attack him. I'm using dragon. And then the top is just comparing our sleep and para as usual. And this is one of those cases where Kiriniko is showing that during certain states, his arms should be taking additional dragon damage. And I could not figure it out. If it happens, he gets knocked out of it so quickly that you barely have time to test it. So like, I know when he's wounded, he does take good element, but he will always continually take good raw. And he's so weak to paralysis that I don't know why you wouldn't just keep using paralysis. Between paralysis and attacking his wings, it's going to be a lot of topples that you'll be getting up over the course of a fight. So for the most part, poison or blast or whatever is a secondary. Dragon, if you want to try and figure out whatever is going on with his mechanic, I mean, that could be an entire day's study of studying Arkveld in terms of trying to figure out exactly how his elemental absorption works, let alone the armor skill elemental absorption. But as it is, you know, this is our top tier raw guy. Even if you wanted to use element, most of the time you're not going to be getting any benefit from it. So paralysis? When I play in a group and we're playing against Arkveld, we pretty much all use just use paralysis. You know, if somebody's using a gun lance, you know, the extra fire damage from the gun lance will help. But otherwise, just go for the wings and see him trip. That's all you can really do. Uth Duna, again, continuing this tier 3 trend of being like, please use status on me. The head is actually amazing for element. The problem is the head is kind of annoying to hit, and the arms are not. But then the arms don't take very good elemental damage. I don't really know what's going on there. You could use it. If you were using like dual blades, but you didn't invest too much in the element, I could see that. But even then, I feel like for most people, most of the time, they'd rather use paralysis. The poison max resistance is not that high. That's actually pretty okay, but they don't really take extreme poison damage either. So I don't know if I'm really convinced. New Udra. Interesting fight here. Continues that sort of trend of being a cephalopod. I think they're called cephalopods, right? And kind of being slightly weaker to sleep. So if there's one huge takeaway from what will probably be a nearly 45-minute long video, is that in groups, you're probably better off bringing sleep than you are bringing paralysis. Let me see if I can show it. Okay, so here's our sleep going off. And you can just see again, you know, it just keeps going and going and going. By my measurements, that is longer and he is easier to be put to sleep than paralysis. Now, there are certain areas where you're going to be hitting him where water does have a good elemental ratio. But even under Kiriniko, under the guide, it never really gets that great on everything all the time. When he's in his fire state, it's kind of okay. But even then, it just doesn't get high enough compared to the amount of raw damage he takes. It's a little bit of a shame. Okay, so Jin Dahaad is kind of a weird recommendation because paralysis is good on him, but you probably don't want to use paralysis the entire time. And so in terms of recommending a secondary weapon, I'm very conflicted. Similar poison weakness as Uth Duna, I mentioned that the damage isn't terrible. At least the max resistance isn't terrible, but the damage isn't that good. Blast is just normal. I wouldn't recommend sleep, really. Fire is okay situationally. If you're hitting the head consistently, fire is all right. It's a hard monster to make a recommendation on. You can't go wrong with any of them. Ideally, you use two of them, though. I mean, you should at the very least take advantage of the paralysis. Whether you want to take advantage of it at the beginning or the end is up to you. I think the end is when things get like a tiny bit scarier. So it might be nice to save it for the very end. In the beginning, maybe use Blast to help get some breaks and some flinches. You could also potentially use Poison, again, for the damage, or Blast, or a Fire for you know, situationally. It's really up to you. Here's the paralysis. Imagine if you had like 3 Gunlance users. It's this long recovery animation that makes the paralysis so good. And if you had earplugs too, that would go even crazier. Or if you just like evaded or blocked the roar. Okay, Rey Dau. Nothing has changed. All these apexes hate element. And like, again, like I'm really conflicted with what to recommend. It's insane that I would even recommend paralysis because the first application is 300. It's like, that's really high, but it does last for 12 seconds, which is a pretty long time. It doesn't take poison damage. He's just got the normal blast resistance, 70, 30, 670 with 150 damage. If you're 100% of the time going to be hitting the head, ice can be okay. He does have a large head. I would say maybe use both. Use your preferred element, maybe use both of them, blast and paralysis, until you're done, and then switch to ice. It really depends on your weapon. If I were using dual blades, I guess I would probably try to use ice, and then everything else I would just focus on status. Gore, again, not making things easy on us. Really a very status-defined existence at the moment. So the funny thing here is he does attack very aggressively. I think paralysis and sleep are fine on him. They're not great. But then you kind of want to use those statuses for when he's actually like in his dragon form. But when he's in his like, you know, enraged form, that's actually when dragon is at its best, when you're attacking his feelers. I didn't put the feelers on here because it you know, is pretty much the same as the head. So I just wanted to include the 4-leg ratio just to show that other than the feelers, everything sucks. And another strange thing is under the guide, it said when he's in his different state, his wings take additional dragon damage and just additional damage in general. My testing so far has shown they don't. I don't know if it's the same sort of thing as Arkveld. I'm missing something. I'm sure I am. But they didn't seem like they got any weaker when his feelers were out. So I don't really know what to say. So there's really no secret to this fight. Dragon, I would not invest much in it. I would keep it at the very base level. Don't put any points into it. Statuses are fine. Maybe even save them for when he's got his feelers out, just to make sure that you can continue to attack his head when the feelers are out. Okay, Xia. This is a fun one. This is a fun one because you have to SOS for this. Thank you, Yato, for posting the SOS. So, 2 forms. We talked about this before. Crystal form. Your dragon element actually has a very good ratio here for cutting and then for impact on the wing arms. Otherwise, it's not a bad time to use your blast. I mean, he really doesn't take very good damage. And I could even see, theoretically, poison being okay when he's crystallized. Because with a max of 550, that's really not that bad. And he's not taking damage from anything else. But the moment he is released, look at that, KO, good job. Now he takes good damage. And now that he's got great raw hit zones is when you want to start switching yourself over to your paralysis and sleep. Again, paralysis works great. 12 seconds is a pretty long time for them to be paralyzed. And even the sleep animation is very long as well. 10 seconds is not bad, and with a max of 750 increasing by 100, sleep isn't bad either. So if there were ever a situation where you felt like, I want to make sure I'm switching back and forth between element and status, this is one. And I think that's fun. I think that's really great. You've got 2 different discrete forms, 2 different exposed hit zones that kind of encourage you to actually utilize that weapon switch mechanic. But yeah, in general, head, and then when they're exposed, the wing arms are where you want to be targeting here. Okay, so that's it. So I did some math before Kiriniko had it to get this data mine done. Maybe when we do damage formula explanation, I'll go over it. But here, for your pleasure, within the cards is the hit zones for the high performance barrel puncher. It's not going to help you too much. What I will say is when you're practicing combos, 50 is definitely a little higher than average than what you're going to see for most things in the game. So in terms of elemental combos will have a slight advantage here, just to keep that in mind. Okay, so video went even longer than the last one. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Again, if you enjoy the cards, you enjoy this video, you leave the thumbs up. I use no social media. For my own mental health, I stay off of Reddit and Twitter and everywhere else. I'm just happier that way. But if you go around those places, you want to share it, please do. If you've got friends that are playing the game, please share the cards and the video with them. I would appreciate it. Just have people like looking at it. I made it. I want people to look at it. And that's it. Hopefully you like it. If you guys really, really like this, if you really like this content, I could go back in the future. I could expand these cards out. Normally they look, let me show you what they look like in general. Normally they look like this. I could maybe make 1 card per monster. I could include more hit zones. I can maybe even include like a little strategy snippet. Just a little bit more information on the monster. I could include KO values. I can include trap values. Let me know. Let me know if you would like that and if you would use that. Okay, so that's it. A lot of work went in this video. Again, hopefully you liked it. Next video, I already kind of know what it's going to be on, so look forward to that one. Thanks.